Hi there, I'm Vincent Boss and I provide dating and self-improvement advice. And in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing They Are Watching You. I provide audio coaching for breakup recovery, trying to get an ex back, attracting someone new, and life coaching. Visit www.dateme.tips for more details. Please check your spam and junk folders if you are expecting an email from me. So now let's get back into today's podcast. And today we are discussing They Are Watching You. So if you're feeling low, it can be difficult to stay motivated. However, it's vital to keep pushing forward as you never know who's watching your life unfold. In today's podcast, I'll be discussing 3 types of people who are keeping an eye on your progress. So let's get straight into this, and point number 1 is an ex. So when we're talking about the first type of person who is potentially watching you, we have to consider that this may be an ex. So maybe you were dumped, or maybe you are actually the dumper. The reality is that your ex is probably keeping an eye on your life. Now, if you want to try to get your ex back, it's absolutely vital that you increase and grow the romantic emotional attraction that your ex feels for you. Because especially if you were dumped, that level of attraction was likely quite low at the time of the breakup. And beyond that, it's still likely to not be overly high, because if it was, they would have already wanted to reconnect with you. Now, if you were the dumper, then the argument could be made that your dumpee was always feeling a high level of attraction towards you. But if it's been some time, you don't know, for instance, how their levels of attraction may have dipped in the interim period between you ending the relationship and now you may be somewhat curious about reconnection. So either way, it's very, very important that you live your life the right way and put across the correct impressions that you want people to believe is quote-unquote you. I often say, but social media is PR. Social media is what we want other people to believe is ourselves. Now, it doesn't mean that you should be deliberately acting or deliberately lying, but it does mean, regarding social media, that you need to be making sure that you present yourself as your best self. This isn't lying, this isn't acting, this is just being your best self and then promoting yourself in that appropriate way. Now, it's not just about social media. Living your life is very, very important to make sure you do it in the correct way, whether this is in person or whether this is online. You don't know who is watching you. Now, whether or not you interpret this as some type of almost stalkerish behaviour, which of course is not good, or whether you interpret this as some type of behaviour where somebody is just passively keeping a tabs on you. Now, it doesn't really matter how you actually consider this. The reality is that your ex from the near or distant past is likely trying to work out what's going on in your life right now. Now, maybe, as I've just alluded to, this is an ex from just a few months ago. Or perhaps this is an ex from many, many years ago. Sometimes people have been dumped, they want to try to get their ex back, they find it frustrating that they don't seem to be able to attract their dumper back into their life. But what they can scarcely believe is that they then find out that a previous ex from many, many years ago is watching their stories on social media, or maybe even reaching out to them. The amount of people I speak to via my audio coaching service, and we're speaking because they want to try and get an ex back, an ex that potentially dumped them in the last year or so. And yet they then tell me that out of nowhere they've received contact from an ex from 5 years ago. When you hear stories like this, it is something that you can then consider to really give people hope about getting an ex back from a much more recent breakup. But if somebody from the far past is reaching out to you, there is a proof of concept that exes could come back. Now, they're only going to come back if they grow romantic emotional attraction. And this can certainly be helped along if you're given across a good impression of yourself, because people are watching. And that's the point of today's podcast. You might not realize how, you might not realize why, but people are paying attention. Whatever you do, whatever you say, however you act, whatever you put into the world, somebody is going to notice, even if you think nobody does. Even if you think nobody cares, even if you think, well, it doesn't matter because nobody's bothered, let me tell you, somebody is watching. And as we go through today's podcast, I'm going to be letting you know of other potential people who are viewing your social media when you least expect it, who are speaking to friends of friends that you didn't realise, who are really trying to understand what you're doing at this point in your life and for what reason that would actually benefit them. You know, most people are not going to be trying to find information out just because they're nosy, just because they're a busybody, just because they want to know what's going on in other people's lives. Most of the time, people are doing this for a reason. And in point number one, this reason is to see if you are somebody that they would still like to have a connection with. Maybe you dumped them, and at the time of a breakup they were heartbroken, but then since that, you have decided you made a mistake, but potentially you tried to reconnect with them and they said no. And now we're a year down the line and you can't believe your eyes when you find out that this dumpee is now viewing your stories. This just shows how feelings can ebb and flow. You dumped them, you then changed your mind, they then didn't want you back, now you find out they're interested again. So you've got to be living your life the right way, because if you don't, then when you get the opportunity to reconnect, it might not go your way. So whether you're the dumper, whether you're the dumpee, whether this is something from a recent past, whether this is something from many, many years ago, point number one about who could be watching you and why you need to be living your life the right way to give across the best impression of yourself, we have to consider that it could be your ex. So now let's get into point number two and the second point of today's podcast. Please like this video if you're watching on YouTube and subscribe to the channel. And point number two is the next love of your life. So in particular, if you've gone through a breakup, maybe you were dumped and you want to try to get your ex back, hearing me say the next love of your life could be paying attention to what you're doing isn't necessarily going to be something that A, you believe, or B, you care about, but you need to. You know, even if you are in a position where you're fully focused on one particular person, i.e. an ex, it's very important to realise that nothing in life is guaranteed. There is no 100% guaranteed way to get an ex back. Nothing works 100% of the time, and nothing fails 100% of the time. And therefore, we have to consider that our happiness may lay with somebody that we don't even know right now. Or maybe we do know, but only very casually. And this is why the next type of person that could be quote-unquote watching you is the next love of your life. Somebody who you'd be very excited to find out about if only you knew, and at some point you likely will. Now maybe this is a friend of a friend, maybe this is a distant acquaintance. You know, on social media, we often allow people to view our profiles who don't really know much about us. Maybe we met them once, maybe we didn't even meet them at all, we got a friend request or a follow request, or maybe our profiles are completely open, and therefore they can just see what we're posting. Now this can be quite dangerous from a security point of view, but that is the subject for another podcast, you know. But what we're talking about right now is the positive side of it and how somebody could be taking a liking to you as a person. Now, how could they find out about all of this? Well, sometimes it's quite random, sometimes it's a friend suggestion, sometimes they might have seen a comment that you typed and they liked what you put, and then before you know it, they're following you or they're friends with you, whatever it may be. Again, social media plays a huge role of how somebody that you don't even realise could be really, really taking a liking to you, and maybe once you get to know them, you will feel the same. Maybe you look at who's viewing your stories and there's somebody that you don't really recognise or realise, but you kind of notice that they're viewing every single story. Okay, that's why it's so important that stories you put on social media are positive. They are truthful, but they're also positive. You need to make sure that you get across your best self. Now, when we talk offline, living your life to the full, you don't know who is paying attention to you. Imagine that every day before work, you pop into a coffee shop. Okay, you buy a coffee, bite to eat, and then you go on to your place of work. What you don't realise is, coincidentally, at the same time every day, there is somebody else doing a similar thing at a similar time who is noticing you. You know, they're noticing how you look. They're noticing how you communicate with the cashier, with the waitress, with the waiter. They're noticing these things. And everything that you do, everything that you say, how you look, is all going to come together to potentially mean that one day they might say hi to you. Or one day you might actually notice them, say hello, and you're shocked to find out that they seem to know a fair bit about you because they've been interested, they've been intrigued. And that is why you need to be very, very careful in how you present yourself. Now, if I was going to give anybody some quick advice about the type of person they may want to date potentially, I would always suggest you look at how this potential person treats a waiter, that potential person treats a waitress, that potential person treats a cashier. If you see how somebody treats a member of staff, a member of the workforce, if you see how they communicate with them, you can often get a good vibe on the type of person that they are. If you find somebody who is very rude to these types of people, then they're not necessarily going to be great communicators, or for that matter, a great person overall. Now, I'm not saying that we can't all have a bad day. Of course we can. We can all have a bad day and maybe we say something we regret. But in this instance, we're talking about somebody who is coincidentally viewing how you interact with people every single day, and they will get the vibe of how you are generally, not on a one-off day, but generally speaking, how do you treat others? Generally speaking, how do you present yourself? Generally speaking, how do you look? Maybe even how do you smell? This is why you've got to be living your life in the right way every single day, because you don't know who's watching you. And it might be the next love of your life. And maybe you don't hear from them because just when they're about to say hi for the first time, you do something which really turns them off. And therefore, you would never ever know. So please make sure you're doing the right thing as much of the time that is feasibly possible. Now, if you would like advice and support about how to try and increase the chance of being an attractive person, whether this is to your ex, whether this is to somebody new, however you want to live your life in the right way, then you may want to consider my audio coaching service, where me and you can speak one-on-one about your unique specific situation. Go to my website, www.dateme.tips, for more information about how I can become your coach and your teammate via my audio coaching service. So now let's get into point number 3 and the final point of today's podcast about they are watching you. And point number 3 is your employer. So when we're living our life, we have to consider that our employer may be watching us. Now, are they watching us directly or is it indirectly? Well, it's likely to be both. Maybe on social media, you deliberately have your profiles as private. Maybe on social media, you deliberately don't allow your boss or somebody who works with you to actually be connected to see your profile. And maybe therefore you think that you can post certain things that the workforce, your boss, your employer would never find out about. Well, please, please, please always assume that they are watching. You don't know if they have a friend of a friend who keeps an eye on the people that work within the company. You don't know if they have a fake profile. Not that that is to be encouraged, not that that is a good thing in itself, but these types of things happen. And therefore you need to be wary of how you behave, how you act, how you present yourself in all settings, especially when it could affect your place of work. Now, I'm not saying that you can't be yourself. I'm not saying that you can't let off steam, but I am saying that if you're going to risk behaviour which you know would get you in trouble, don't put it online. For that matter, don't do it at all. But you know what I'm trying to get across here. Don't just assume that because the name of your employer isn't on your follow list, but they can't somehow see what you're posting online. Even if there is no direct connection, of course, something could spread to different places, screenshots, whatever it may be. Use your common sense. Always assume they're watching. Now, it doesn't have to be online. The podcast today has always been about online, but also offline. And this goes across there as well. Of course, when you're offline, there's even more opportunity for a potential employer to find out information about you. Just because they're not in your circle of friends, you don't know who the friend of a friend is. You don't know if you were at a pub or a bar, if there's somebody in the background who knows who you are, but you don't realise they're friends with your manager. Okay, you don't know this. So please behave in a way which is going to carry yourself in the best possible light. Remember, you're doing it for you to present yourself for everybody in the best light. It's not just about doing things in a certain way because you don't want to get fired, but deep down you think, well, I don't really think like this, and really I want to express myself in my own kind of way. I'm just saying, if you're a good person, a quote-unquote good person, you will know what that entails. If you live your life in the best way you possibly can, you are less likely to get in trouble at your place of work. You are less likely to turn somebody off who was about to make contact with you for the first time because they've really liked you from afar. And you're also less likely to ruin things with an ex who may have actually just been about to reach out to you, but then change their mind because of something you posted online or said to someone that then got back to them. The point of today's podcast is to remember that they are watching you. If you believe that this podcast has helped you, then please consider buying me a coffee. The link to do so is in the description.